A heavy storm rages over Accra, Ghana. Thunder cracks through the night, and the rain pours down in thick sheets, drumming against the Grand Mansion's iron gates. The driveway is slick with water, and the golden lights from the house barely pierce through the darkness. At the entrance, Zelina stands shivering, her simple dress drenched, clinging to her trembling body. Her feet are bare, her suitcase overturned beside her, its contents scattered and soaked. The wind howls, but not as fiercely as the voice of Madame Kessia, her mother-in-law, who glares at her with disgust. "You are nothing!" Madame Kessia spits, her richly embroidered wrapper untouched by the storm. "A low-class girl like you should never have stepped into my son's house. Look at you. Pathetic!" Zelina's lips quiver, her hands pressed together in a desperate plea. "Please, Mama Kessia, don't do this. Kwame, say something. Please." Her voice is barely above a whisper, her tears lost in the rain. But Kwame, her husband, the man who once swore to protect her, remains silent. He stands just behind his mother, dressed in an expensive suit, his arms crossed, his eyes cold. The same man who had once chased after her, promised her love, now looked at her like a stranger. "Kwame!" Zelina takes a shaky step forward, but he looks away, his silence cutting deeper than any insult. Madame Kessia smirks, stepping closer, her voice dripping with cruelty. "You think my son will defend you? Foolish girl. He belongs to his family, not to a nobody like you." Zelina feels her knees weaken, but she fights to stand tall. "But I'm his wife. We took vows." "Vows!" Madame Kessia throws her head back in laughter. "Vows mean nothing when a mistake can be erased. And you, dear, were the biggest mistake of his life." With that, she gestures to the security guards. "Shut the gates. I don't want to see her face again." Zelina gasps as the tall iron gates begin to close. She turns to Kwame one last time, hoping, praying for even a flicker of regret in his eyes. But all she sees is indifference. The gates slam shut with a loud clang, sealing her fate. The mansion, once her home, now feels like a cruel illusion, disappearing behind the storm. Zelina stands alone in the freezing rain, her heart breaking, her body shaking. A wave of nausea rolls over her, and she clutches her stomach, a small growing secret inside her. She has nowhere to go, no family to run to, no shelter from the storm. And so, with the rain as her only companion, she takes a slow, painful step forward into the unknown. Zelina's hands used to be covered in tiny pricks from needles, her days spent stitching dreams into colourful fabrics. She was a seamstress, young and full of ambition, working tirelessly in a small tailor shop in Accra. Her heart danced with the hope of one day owning her own boutique, a place where her designs would shine. It was during the annual market festival that her path crossed with Kwame's. The streets were alive with music and laughter, the scent of roasted maize filling the air. Zelina had only stepped out to buy a few supplies when she felt someone watching her. She turned, and there he was, tall, confident, dressed in fine clothes that marked him as a man of wealth. Kwame. He was smitten from the start, following her through the market, finding excuses to talk to her. "A beauty like you shouldn't be carrying all these bags alone," he had said, flashing a charming smile. She laughed, brushing him off, but he was persistent. He kept coming back to her shop, ordering clothes he didn't need, just to see her. At first, she resisted. Men like him didn't marry girls like her, but Kwame was relentless, showering her with gifts, sweet words, and promises of forever. He convinced her that love could break barriers, that his family's wealth meant nothing compared to the love they shared. And against all odds, he married her. The wedding was small, quiet. His family refused to attend, calling her a gold digger, a nobody. His mother, Madame Kessia, made it clear she would never accept Zelina. But Kwame held her hands and whispered, "We don't need their approval. It's just you and me." For a while, she believed him. She thought love was enough. But the fairy tale was short-lived. The moment they settled into their new life, Kwame began to change. The warmth in his eyes faded. His words grew colder. He stopped coming home early, barely spoke to her, and slowly, she saw the invisible strings controlling him, strings held by his mother. Madame Kesia's disapproval turned into poison, dripping into his ears day after day. "She is beneath you," she would say. "You deserve a woman of class, not some tailor's daughter." Kwame stopped holding her hand, stopped looking at her the way he used to, and before she even realized it, She had become nothing more than a shadow in her own marriage. The rain had turned the driveway into a river, but the cold running through Zelina's veins had nothing to do with the weather. She stood there, soaked to the bone, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the storm. Kwame stood just a few feet away, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The man she had loved, the man who had once fought for her, now looked at her like a burden he was eager to throw away. "Leave," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "You don't belong here." Zelina's breath caught in her throat. She searched his face for a sign, any sign, that this was a mistake, that he would take it back, that he would fight for her the way he once did. But all she found was indifference. Her lips trembled. "Kwame, you made a promise. We stood before God, before the world, and you said you would love me forever. You swore." Kwame turned away, as if her words were nothing more than the wind. From behind him, Madame Kessia's cruel laughter sliced through the night. She stepped forward, her expensive gold bracelets clinking, as she placed a hand on her son's shoulder, a gesture of triumph. "Vows mean nothing when they were a mistake to begin with," she sneered. "Now stop embarrassing yourself, girl, and leave before I have the guards throw you out like the stray you are." Zelina's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had no family to run to, no home to return to. Everything she had, everything she was, had been tied to this house, to this man, and now it was all gone. The heavy iron gates creaked as they began to close. She could see Kwame's silhouette disappearing behind them, could hear Madame Kessia's final words before the storm swallowed them whole. "You were never good enough for my son." The gates slammed shut, sealing her fate. Zelina's hands trembled as she clutched her belly, a silent secret growing inside her. She hadn't told Kwame, hadn't told anyone. A child, his child, now abandoned alongside her. The rain poured harder, drenching her completely. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. The storm raged on, the wind howling through the empty streets as Zelina staggered forward. Her soaked dress clung to her shivering body, her feet dragging through the mud. Each step felt heavier than the last, her vision blurring from exhaustion. She had no idea where she was going. Nowhere felt safe. Nowhere felt like home. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the cold, wet pavement. The world around her tilted, the edges of her vision darkening. She barely registered the sound of an approaching vehicle, the low hum of a powerful engine cutting through the rain. A sleek black limousine came to a slow stop just a few feet away. Its polished surface gleamed under the streetlights, untouched by the chaos of the storm. For a moment, all she could do was stare. Who would be driving through this storm in such a car? The back window rolled down with a quiet whir. A man sat inside, his face partially shadowed, but his sharp features were unmistakable. He was tall, well-dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and influence. His dark eyes locked onto her, widening in shock. "Zelina?" His voice was deep, familiar in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. She blinked through the rain, struggling to place him. Who was he? How did he know her? Before she could speak, the car door opened, and he stepped out, holding a large umbrella over them both. The contrast between them was stark. Him, composed and powerful, untouched by the rain. Her, broken and drenched, barely able to stand. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. And then, with a voice full of something she couldn't quite understand, he whispered, "I've been looking for you." Zelina shivered as Darian draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric was a stark contrast to the cold rain that had soaked her to the bone. He guided her into the limousine, and as the door shut, the world outside faded into silence. The soft leather seats, the gentle hum of the heater, everything felt surreal. She clutched the jacket tighter, her hands trembling. Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darian studied her for a moment, his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read. Regret? Relief? "I knew your father," he said softly. Zelina's breath caught. "My father?" He nodded. "Jacob Mensah. He was more than just a tailor. He was an artist with fabric, a man of honor." Darian exhaled deeply, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "Years ago, he helped me when I was just a struggling businessman. He believed in me when no one else did. I owed him everything." Zelina's throat tightened. It had been years since she'd heard her father's name spoken with such respect. He used to talk about you, Darian continued, a small smile touching his lips. Told me his greatest pride wasn't his work, but his daughter. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would look after you. Tears welled in her eyes. Her father had passed away when she was barely a teenager. Since then, life had been a constant struggle, a fight for survival. She had no idea someone out there had been searching for her. But I lost track of you after he died, Darian admitted, his jaw tightening. I tried to find you, but life took us in different directions. And now, he glanced at her drenched dress, the exhaustion on her face. Now I find you like this. A lump formed in her throat, the kindness in his eyes, the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with purpose, made her want to break down. You don't have to be alone anymore, Zelina, Darian said, his voice firm. Let me help you. Let me give you the life your father would have wanted for you. She stared at him, overwhelmed, unsure if she should trust the sudden turn in her fate. But deep down, in the place where hope still flickered, she knew. This was the second chance she had been waiting for. With Darian's help, Zelina's life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. He introduced her to the bustling fashion industry in Kumasi, a city known for its vibrant textiles and skilled artisans. Darian knew talent when he saw it, and he saw something special in Zelina. He sponsored her to start her own tailoring business, arranging meetings with suppliers, designers, and influencers. At first, it was a struggle. The competition was fierce, and there were moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she could ever truly succeed. But Darian was always there, pushing her to keep going, believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. As her skill with fabric and design blossomed, so did her reputation. Word of her exquisite craftsmanship spread like wildfire, and soon, high-class clients were knocking on her door. She designed stunning gowns, custom-made suits, and elegant dresses for people who wanted to wear something special, something that reflected their status and their taste. But it wasn't just her work that set her apart. It was her unwavering commitment to excellence. She put her heart into every stitch, every detail, and her clients noticed. They returned again and again, not just for the clothes, but for the experience of working with someone who truly understood what it meant to be elegant. In the midst of her rising success, Zelina's life took another beautiful turn. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Jalil, named after her late father. Holding him in her arms, she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This little boy was her future, and she was determined to build a life for him that was filled with love, opportunity, and respect. With Jalil by her side, Zelina poured her heart and soul into her business. She expanded her tailoring shop into a full-fledged fashion empire, opening multiple stores across Ghana. Each one was a testament to her journey, to the woman she had become, not just a survivor, but a queen in her own right. Her designs were now sought after globally, and she was known as one of the most powerful and influential designers in the industry. But Zelina never forgot her roots. She continued to mentor young seamstresses, passing on the lessons she had learned from both her father and her own struggles. Zelina's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. From the girl who had been abandoned on a rainy night to the woman who now stood at the top of the fashion world, she had created her own destiny, one stitch at a time. As the years passed, the lavish lifestyle that Kwame and Madame Kesia had once enjoyed began to crumble. At first, it was small setbacks, delayed payments, mounting debts. But soon, the full weight of their poor decisions caught up with them. Kwame's business, once thriving under his family's influence, began to collapse. He had made reckless investments, chasing quick profits without considering the long-term consequences. His empire, built on arrogance and greed, fell apart piece by piece. The phone calls became more frequent, angry creditors demanding payment, clients pulling out of deals, and suppliers refusing to deliver goods. It was the beginning of a downward spiral, and Kwame found himself helpless, unable to stop the avalanche of problems barreling down on him. Madame Kesia, who had once been the proud matriarch, now found herself fighting for her life. Her health, always fragile, deteriorated rapidly. She was diagnosed with a severe illness that drained their resources even further. Kwame tried to keep up appearances, pretending everything was fine, but the truth was undeniable. The once grand mansion that had been a symbol of their wealth and status now stood as a haunting reminder of their fall from grace. The gardens that had once been meticulously manicured were now overgrown, and the walls that had echoed with laughter and music now felt cold and silent. The house that Zelina had once called her prison was now at risk of foreclosure. The bank had started sending warnings, and the letters piled up on Kwame's desk, each one more urgent than the last. But no matter how much he tried to fix things, it was too late. The damage was done, and their days of luxury were over. As the weight of their failures pressed down on them, Kwame found himself haunted by the decisions he had made. He had chosen his mother over his wife, cast Zelina out in the rain. And for what? In the end, his pride, his arrogance, and his blind loyalty to Madame Kessia had cost him everything. The house that had once been a symbol of their power now echoed with emptiness. And deep inside, Kwame knew the universe had a way of making things right, even if it took time. The years had passed, and the world had changed around Kwame and Madame Kessia. The mansion they once lived in had been sold to pay off debts, and their luxurious lifestyle had become a distant memory. Now, Kwame and Madame Kessia found themselves at a prestigious business gala, desperate to restore their fortunes. They were there to seek investors, hoping to revive Kwame's business and secure a future for themselves. The grand hall was filled with influential figures, business moguls, politicians, and celebrities, all dressed in their finest attire. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, and the sound of elegant conversations filled the air. But as Kwame and Madame Kessia walked into the event, their eyes were drawn to the stage at the front of the room. The event was being hosted by none other than Zelina. Kwame's heart skipped a beat. He had not seen her in years, and he had never expected to encounter her in such an environment. Back then, she was just the humble seamstress from a poor background, easily dismissed by him and his family. But now, as he looked at the elegant stage, he realized that Zelina was not the same woman he had discarded. Suddenly, Zelina appeared at the top of the staircase, stepping onto the stage with poise and grace. She was wearing a stunning designer gown that shimmered under the lights. Every eye in the room turned to her, captivated by her presence. Her beauty had always been undeniable, but now there was something different about her, something powerful, magnetic. She exuded confidence, strength, and an aura of success that made it impossible for anyone to ignore her. It wasn't just the gown or the way she looked. There was a fire within her, a sense of accomplishment that filled the room. This was a woman who had worked hard, fought for every inch of her success, and had come out on top. Gasps filled the room as the realization dawned on the crowd. The woman standing before them, the woman they had once overlooked, was now a powerful figure, an industry leader. The whispers began to spread like wildfire. "Is that Zelina?" someone asked. "The same woman who was thrown out in the rain?" Kwame stood frozen in place, his mind racing. The woman he had betrayed, the woman he had cast aside, was now the one they all admired. His chest tightened with the crushing weight of guilt and regret. How could he have been so blind? How could he have underestimated her? Madame Kessia, too, stood beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had once mocked Zelina, calling her nothing, but now she saw the woman who had risen from nothing to become everything. Zelina took her place on the stage, her voice calm and commanding as she addressed the room. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her tone confident. "Tonight is about more than just business. It's about resilience, about rising above obstacles, and about making your mark on the world. Thank you for being here." Kwame's face reddened with humiliation. The woman he had cast aside was now the one holding the power, the one in control. The tables had turned, and he could no longer ignore the truth. Zelina had made something of herself, while he had lost everything. As she spoke, it became clear to everyone in the room that Zelina was no longer just a former wife or a woman from a humble background. She was a queen in her own right, an unstoppable force who had turned betrayal into triumph. As the gala continued, Kwame and Madame Kessia could no longer contain themselves. The weight of their downfall, the shame of seeing Zelina rise above them, was unbearable. Madame Kessia, once so proud and arrogant, now looked small and desperate. Her fine clothes could not hide the years of struggle, the worry lines on her face, or the trembling in her voice. She stepped forward, pushing through the crowd, her eyes pleading. "Zelina, my daughter, please." Her voice cracked as she reached out a shaky hand. We were wrong. We didn't know your worth. Please, help us." Kwame followed, his pride shattered, his voice almost a whisper. "Zelina, please. I was a fool. I let my mother control me. I let you go, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. Give me another chance. I'll do anything." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Zelina, waiting for her response. But she didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied them, her expression unreadable. These were the same people who had once looked down on her, humiliated her, thrown her into the storm without mercy. And now, here they were, on their knees, begging. A slow, knowing smile formed on her lips. "You want another chance?" she asked, tilting her head. "Where was this regret when I was crying in the rain? Where was this love when I was begging to stay?" Kwame lowered his head in shame. Madame Kessia's eyes darted around, desperate for a lifeline. "We didn't know," she murmured. Zelina raised a hand, silencing her. Her voice was steady but firm. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You threw me away like I was nothing. And now that life has humbled you, you come crawling back." She shook her head. "No, Kwame. You made your choice. You chose your mother over your wife. Now, you must live with that choice." A single tear rolled down Kwame's cheek, but Zelina had no more sympathy to offer. The man, who had once vowed to love and protect her, had abandoned her when she needed him the most. And now, there was no going back. She turned to Darian, who stood beside her, strong and unwavering. Without hesitation, she took his arm, standing tall beside the man who had lifted her when she had nothing. With one last glance at Kwame and Madame Kessia, Zelina spoke her final words to them. "Goodbye." Then, with grace and power, she walked away, arm in arm with Darian, leaving them standing alone, humiliated and broken, as the crowd whispered and watched. The woman they had underestimated had become the woman they could never reach again. As the night came to a close, Zelina stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out over the glowing city skyline. The same city that once held her struggles now held her triumph. She had built herself up from nothing, turning pain into power, betrayal into success. She thought back to the stormy night when she was cast out, helpless and alone. Back then, she had felt like her world was ending. But now, she understood it was only the beginning. Rejection had been her greatest blessing. It had pushed her toward her true destiny, toward people who valued her, toward a life far greater than she had ever imagined. Somewhere, Kwame and Madame Kezia would be living with their regrets, haunted by the choices they made. But their downfall was no longer her concern. She had moved on, risen above, and reclaimed her life. With a deep breath, she turned away from the city lights and stepped inside, where Darian and little Jalil were waiting. She was no longer the abandoned woman in the rain. She was a queen in her own right. Never underestimate a woman's strength. The ones who betray you today will regret it tomorrow. If you loved Zelina's journey from betrayal to power, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.